Hi, I'm Michelle, and this is Solo in Canada Musings from Midlife Plus. Last week, I posted a video on whether or not people thought it was still feasible to budget a middle class lifestyle within an Ontario city. And there was an incredible amount of engagement in the comment section from that video. This is clearly something that's top of mind in many people's thoughts. And I really like to thank all of the people who did respond because it gave me more things to think about and consider. And it also offered a lot of useful information, something very practical to people as they are trying to juggle the constantly increasing costs of living here in Ontario. Ultimately the consensus is that there are a few cities still standing where you might be able to live on that amount if you were being very careful. And those cities mentioned were Cornwall in the east, in the southwest, Sarnia, in the north, Thunder Bay, North Bay, and Sault Ste. Marie. In addition to the cities that you could live in, people were giving all kinds of great advice on the types of lifestyle changes that one could make and still continue to live a comfortable life. So I thought it would be really interesting to look back 100 years ago during the time of the Great Depression, which Canada was significantly impacted by, to see how people's lifestyles changed in the 1930s because of the great shift in the standard of living and their ability to pay their bills, and see what lessons we could take from that and apply them to our life today. So stay tuned because later in the video, I'm going to be giving a list of some of those strategies that you might find a great takeaway for you. I'm not suggesting that every strategy being mentioned is appropriate for everyone, but surely in the list that you'll be able to find something that does apply. And I'll also offer a free PDF with those suggestions listed to help you on your way. In addition, I also was curious to see if we were starting to head towards another Great Depression. The first Great Depression, most experts agree, the catalyst was the collapse of the stock market in 1929. And that might not be the way the next Great Depression occurs, but I'm starting to wonder, and these are just musings from my perspective. I certainly have no access to experts, but I'm just starting to think, is anybody else thinking like me that perhaps the movement of AI and how rapidly it's improving and how many companies will end up purchasing some form of AI to use in their companies in order to not only make work more efficient, but to downsize their workforce. Um, Perhaps a Great Depression might be on the horizon for us because of the incoming AI, as well as coming out of the financially costly strategies that many countries around the world had to respond to the global pandemic in order to ensure that their citizens were, going to survive economically. I'm wondering if in the history books moving forward, they'll look back at this time period where we are significantly economically restrained and think that the catalyst for what happens next was first the global pandemic and then the growth of artificial intelligence. So no matter what strata you're living in, whether you're lower class, middle class, upper class, and even maybe less affluent, but still affluent households, there's no doubt that everybody is feeling the pinch in one way, shape, or another. There's something changing in their lifestyle practices that they are having to tighten the belt in ways that they never needed to do before. Most of us are creatures of comfort, and we've had, if you're in your 50s and 60s, you've had that many years on this planet to live in a certain fashion. And probably, though your upbringing might be very different than your adult lifestyle, you have settled into some form of lifestyle that you're reluctant to give away. Last week, a lot of people suggested moving to rural areas in the north of Ontario and practicing a more homesteading lifestyle because they have done it and they are perfectly happy, which is fine if you have that type of personality and that interests you. But that only works for a certain type of personality, and there are other personalities who would be taken away from all of the things that they love and perhaps all the people that they love, just to go up north and live way out away from a lot of people and a lot of services and a lot of commercial forms of entertainment and pro sports, etc. Um, Away from higher learning institutions where they might be accessing some of the classes there, simply to be able to afford to live. So obviously, you do what you have to do. But if you're not yet forced into that corner, it really is questionable whether or not you will be happy if that isn't something that you've always pined for. If you love nature, you quite often like to go out away from cities and spend time in the forests or on the lakes and rivers. You like to hunt, you like to do a lot of outdoorsy things. That might be just the thing for you. You might want to consider that. But let's look at some of the other alternatives. So one of the things I looked at when I was kind of researching the history of the Great Depression was how people's lifestyles changed, and what were sort of the signs that a depression was coming or that the country wasn't in depression. And I couldn't help but see the parallels for many of these items. So let me show you what I learned. There was an increase in homelessness. So the newspapers were starting to report pictures and stories of where you start to see more homeless camps pop up. Sound familiar? There were decreased work opportunities. At one point in the country, 25% of the population were unemployed, but that didn't happen overnight. That happened slowly over a course of 3 years. Well, we are seeing a lot in the media recently about all of the young people who have spent an entire year looking for work and have not been hired. We've heard a lot of stories about Gen Zs who have been downsized, laid off, and have spent a year and a half looking for a replacement job and can't find anything despite their credentials and their years' experience. So we certainly at this time see decreased work opportunities. There's no question about that. In the 1930s and 40s, it was reported that a lot less families were having children. They were putting off having children, delaying it, or having far fewer children simply because they could not yet afford it. Well, we've heard a lot of that lately. There are a large number of millennials who are stating that they can't afford to have kids. Even if they wanted to have kids, they are not yet having kids, hoping that when they finally can become more financially stable, that they haven't lost the ability to have a family. More women are having children very late into their 30s and early 40s because it has taken them so long to get launched. During the Great Depression, a lot more common milestones in people's lives were delayed, put off because of the circumstances. And we see that today. Many people who would like to get married have waited. First, they had to wait because of the pandemic. Now, the costs of having a wedding are significantly more expensive than they were pre pandemic. So, we see people delaying some of those milestones too. We see them also delaying moving out and becoming a fully fledged independent adult. Many stories in the newspaper and magazines are about younger people who are in their late 20s and early 30s and still living at home because it doesn't make sense for them to be living out on their own, simply because all of their money would be going to their shelter and they would never get ahead that way. They would constantly be in debt. So they are choosing to stay at home much longer. The difficulty with that is depending on the culture, because we do have many cultures in Canada, but depending on the culture, quite often you aren't seen as being a full-fledged adult if you are still living in your parents' basement. At that time as well, more seniors were reported to be working long past the time when they were physically fit to do so and wanted to do so. And we see that again now, 100 years later. Many seniors are reporting that they need to keep a part-time job or continue working in their job for years past when they would have liked to retire. Now, what we did see in the Great Depression that we are only just starting to see little murmurings of now are all the protests. For all the people who were out of work and losing opportunities, there were many protests. There was a lot of civil unrest. We're starting to just see the beginning of that now, but I've been surprised how quietly people have just accepted the new norm and grumbled to their friends and family, but that we haven't seen a revolt. There are so many people now. The middle class are being squeezed out. They are becoming lower class as well in terms of lifestyle. And the rich just keep getting richer. Maybe we're also distracted with all of the huge headlines in the newspaper every day and all of the geopolitical chaos and just trying to manage in our own corner of the world. And everybody's stretched too thin and exhausted that maybe everybody's just so distracted that they can't see the writing on the wall and heed the whispered warnings that are coming down the pipe. I don't want to be an alarmist. And maybe everything isn't going to hell in a handbasket like it feels like it is some days. But isn't it better to over prepare for the worst and then discover later that things didn't get much worse than they are now? And because of all of the preparations you made, you actually come out, financially secure and far more stable because of it. And that just seems like a better plan rather than all of us, just saying, oh, it'll be fine. Nothing terrible's coming. There won't be another Great Depression. AI isn't going to take over all of our jobs and we'll all be out of work and then get slammed because it actually comes to fruition. It just feels better to me to take some precautions here. Well, what do you do anywhere when you hear a storm is coming? Well, you batten down the hatches. What does battening down the hatches mean? It means you take a look around at what parts of your world are vulnerable and you protect that. It means that you gather with others. Usually you all gather in one spot and you put up some protective barriers and you pool your resources and everybody pitches in because there's more work to be done. Well, that's what we need to do. And that's what they did during the Great Depression. So let's look at some of the items. I can't possibly list them all without this being an hour-long video, but let's look at some of the strategies and then I'll post another video going into detail for each one of those strategies. First off, most people tackle their food and how much they're putting towards food and how they can do food differently. There are a lot of Facebook groups showing ways to cook inexpensively. The only thing is that what we don't want to do is lose our health in the doing that. During the 1930s, malnutrition was a really big problem. And we don't want to get into that kind of situation. So even though you might be tapping into those frugal cooking Facebook sites, make sure that you're still providing yourself with all of the balanced nutrients that you need in a day. Most of the time, people cut out their meat purchases when they're tightening their belt, but we need protein. The body needs protein. You need to stay strong. And if you're in your 50s plus, then you're going to be aging and you need to keep your protein up. So if you are cutting back on meat, you definitely need to get cheaper substitutes. So you can get quinoa, lentils, chickpeas. Those are all inexpensive. Make sure you've built those into your diet every single day. Fresh fruit and fresh vegetables are difficult to get, but the nutrient value is the same for frozen. So if you're finding fresh fruits and fresh vegetables too expensive for you, then get the frozen kind because they're still nutritionally sound. And then there's all kinds of people recommending growing your own fruits and vegetables. During the Great Depression, they called those thrift gardens. The other thing that happened during the Great Depression was people started to do more co-housing and families started to come back together. So though they might have been living in different cities or in their own homes, during the 30s, as people became more people in the family became unemployed, they gathered together under one roof. And I think that might be where we're headed here too. I have heard lately, because of housing, more people are fixing up the family home that the boomer parents own and putting in, either an extension or putting, dividing the home into a duplex. But I think that's where we're probably headed for many people. The reduce, reuse, repurpose, everything. I'll talk in detail in my next video about that. Not buying as much if you can provide it from home. So, I've been doing this for years, carrying around a mug with my tea in it rather than buying it when I'm out and about, bringing packed lunches to work rather than buying a lunch at work. Never did that. Going camping for my vacation rather than taking a plane and staying in a hotel. All those strategies that a lot of people already do, but certainly it might be time to revisit. Staycations, visiting thrift shops, getting into bartering. Those are very helpful strategies. Women stopped wearing makeup and getting their hair done. Tracking your spending. I've been tracking my spending for years. And one of the strategies we have available to us now that they didn't have available to them in the 1930s is the internet. And we all know what a wealth of information is out there in the internet. The internet and YouTube in particular would be a great place to do all of the how-tos. So teach yourself more practical life skills where up until now you've had to pay a professional to do. I was just curious, wondering if anybody else like me is worried that we are at the very beginning of a big storm coming our way, and we need to take it seriously and prepare, because 26 and 27 might be really rough years ahead of us. And a lot of us might not be, we might not have our head up and recognizing that. What are your thoughts on that? I would love to hear. Please share in the comments. And if you would like to go back and watch last week's video, I'm going to attach it right here. Click on the link and you can see what discussion was had over that topic, whether or not you could still live on $3,000 a month, live a middle-class lifestyle, and do that in Ontario, Canada. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.